have some things to talk about. New project here, or a new old project, I should say. So, rather than me droning on, let's go ahead, take a look at this thing, and talk a little bit about the history and what is upcoming for us. So like I said at the end of the finale of Russ's build series, the Lexus was coming back, and here it is. So this car was up at accelerated performance for a while, getting a bunch of little wrap-up stuff done that I either didn't have the time or the knowledge to do myself. So we'll get into this car in a little bit, but since the end of Russ's project, there's been a few developments around here and a few little projects that I've knocked out, as well as a bunch of new parts. So let's go ahead and start off with a little bit of work that I did on the Mark IV, and something that I had been meaning to knock out for a while and finally took the time and initiative to do it. We're going to do a modification to the Mark IV's parachute mount. So right here is what we're doing. And if you look at the end of the interface tube, and this is what actually bolts this whole removable dual parachute deal into the Mark IV, you can see that the wall thickness is pretty thin on that tube. And that is a result of me having to turn the tube down or hold it up on the belt sander to get the OD of this interface tube to slide inside the ID of kind of the main body here. So I don't like how thin this is, as when the parachute deploys, all of the force of this whole assembly trying to be ripped off of the back of the car is relegated to just this thin piece of metal right here. So with this piece, which you can see has a pretty good wall thickness to it, and if I sleeve that inside of there, that will provide additional wall thickness, and they'll have it welded right here. I'll do a few plug welds or rosette welds along here, and hopefully that will be strong enough where this whole parachute mount doesn't rip off the back of the car when I finally go to deploy it. Well, the parachute mount modifications are all completed. So, like I showed earlier, I was sleeving the thicker piece of tube into this whole mount, and I actually sleeved it so far that I was able to drill for rosette welds where the the receiver or the input section of the parachute mount actually sleeves inside of the main body of it. So where you see these rosettes around here, it's triple walled there, double walled up here. I capped the end of it, blended everything together with weld, drilled my holes. There's a ton of rosettes throughout. So now I am much more confident that this piece will not come apart as soon as I throw the parachutes and they grab air. All that's left with the Supra's parachute mount reinforcement is knocking out the portion actually on the cage and on the chassis. So, in order to do that, I need to weld these two reinforcement plates that I made yesterday onto the chassis itself. Now, I have everything as far as the parachute mount in place. It's in its position, it's leveled and all of that. And I have all of the fasteners as well as the anti-rotation bracket in place as well. So that way I know that everything fits the way it needs to, as opposed to just putting these reinforcement panels on there, welding them, and then ending up causing myself more problems. So at this point, I'm ready to go ahead and weld these panels in and then spray some paint down, and this project will be a wrap. So in the midst of working on Russ's car, working on the Mark IV, that little parachute modification that I did, there were a bunch of new parts that came in as well, and things that I've kind of been stockpiling in the background. And if you guys have been around for a while, you know I like to accumulate a bunch of stuff and then do a big announcement showing everything that I have all at once. So I did just that with parts for all three of the cars, the Mark II, the SC, and the Mark IV. So let's take a look at what all came in, what all I have, and I guess some of the upcoming plans for all of the cars. So, you guys know the deal. Whenever we come over to the white table here, it's generally about a bunch of new parts, a bunch of new things to talk about, and this instance is no different. So, for all three of my Toyota projects, there are parts on the table here for them, and I guess we will start with the smallest piece and work our way up to the largest piece, or the largest smorgasbord of different items for the cars. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it and talk about the new piece that I have for the Mark IV. So with drag cars, you often hear people talk about bumping into the beams or talk about a bump box or something along those lines. And effectively what you're doing with that is pulsing the trans brake solenoid. So the trans brake will lock the car in a forward gear and reverse, causing the car to not be able to move any direction, but putting load on the engine to help you spool the turbo or something along those lines. Being that the Mark IV is a turbo car, you need something like that to be able to come into the beams and be ready to launch to make your pass under power. And that is where this little guy right here comes into play. So this is a Smooth Stage Plus, and this is the bump box, or a version of a bump box that you hear people talk about. Now you can see that it has dials on it, both for force and speed, and what that translates to is how aggressively the car bumps. Now when you press that button, it momentarily pulses that trans brake solenoid off, so it will allow it to move forward, and these knobs help you fine-tune and adjust just how much it's moving forward and just how big of a bump you are getting. So this I got from my buddy Bob. He's the guy who tunes the Mark IV, who tunes all of my cars at this point in time. And this was his recommendation for a bump box for this car. Now, in addition to the box itself, I also have all of the wiring schematics and directions. And there are two different ways you can wire these up. We have here we go. Smooth Stage Plus. And the Smooth Stage Plus, there's one or two other wires that get connected that alter how the thing works a little bit. I'm sorry I don't have any more information other than that at this point, as I'm still very green to these systems, but we have two different wiring harnesses here. We have the box itself, sticker of course, and this will be going into the Mark IV very soon, in addition to a couple of other wires to get the tack on the race pack dash working, to get the EGT box working on the car, and like I said, most importantly, to get this guy here in the car and working, as this will 100% be a necessity if I want to do anything other than just do test and tunes and kind of exhibition passes. These are necessary and crucial to have an effective, or a turbo car that's effectively able to be drag raced. So I've heard nothing but good things about these. Can't wait to get it in the car, and we will go over that very soon in an upcoming video. Now, if you guys have been around the channel for a while and you remember my crusty green SC300 that I've done a couple of videos on, but it hasn't gotten a ton of love on the channel, not nearly as much as the two Supras. That car has been up at accelerated performance, that is, for a little while now. And I sent it up there with the Supra's old engine harness, the Mark IV's old engine harness, and asked my buddy Russ, hey, can you kind of make the old Mark IV harness work with the SC? And he said, yeah, I can give it a shot. We tried that for a while, ultimately ended up getting a new engine harness for it, and while the car does run at this moment, it doesn't run on all cylinders. We've been through 3 different old AEM boxes, 2 V1 boxes, 1 V2 box, and we keep having an issue with the car having a dead hole or dead holes. Now, normally you would think that if the car is a dead cylinder, that it's usually the fault of the ignition system or a fuel injector or something along those lines. And I would tend to agree with you. However, the dead hole is not isolated to one cylinder. As different ECUs are put in the car, the dead hole moves around 2 different holes or different cylinders in the engine. So, being that an AEM V1 box is almost, from my understanding, almost of legal drinking age in the US, and the V2 is not much younger, the time has now arrived to upgrade the computer in the car to get it to a more modern standard and a better foundation to build upon moving forward, rather than using these old legacy archaic ECUs. And that is where these 2 pieces right here come in. So You may recognize that logo right there, good old Haltech. And what we have in this box is a Haltech Elite 2500 ECU. And this, I've never used a Haltech before, but between some real good buddies of mine that I trust very implicitly with their opinions on ECUs and everything, and the fact that between this box and what's in this bag right here being an adapter harness for a 2JZ, these two items should make this Haltech install a plug-and-play affair and very quickly evolve the SC300 from working with, like I said, an archaic legacy ECU to something very modern, something that is still currently supported, and something that offers us a better way to tune the car and a better way to build moving forward. So we have obviously the box here, and I don't know a whole lot about Haltech, and I can't really speak to the specifics on this at this point in time. I'm sure I will be able to as time goes on and I learn more about it. But the ECU itself, nice small compact package, not very heavy. It looks like it has an internal map sensor, two connectors right here that actually will interface the ECU to the adapter harness to the engine harness. If we pull this panel off right there, you can see the two communication cables. Power status light that will tell you A, if the ECU is receiving the voltage that it's supposed to, and I'm assuming the status light will tell you if the ECU is operable or not. And then the adapter harness itself, if I unbag that, you can see that on this side here, this is what interfaces with the factory wiring, or the Toyota connector, I should say. That's what these three plugs are. These plugs over here, these two black plugs will be what plug into the ECU itself. And then we have a, what is that? 12-pin Deutsch connector right here that does something. It says auxiliary. We have a 4-pin right here that is the CAN bus connection. And we also have what would be the female side of the 12-pin, it looks like. We have an IAT sensor, a couple other odds and ends. And these two things combined should, in theory, be a direct bolt-in, direct plug-and-play, replacing the old AEM boxes with, like I said, a new, modern, standalone ECU. And if all has gone well with this, you will see me drive the car in at the beginning of the episode. Hopefully that does work, but in the next couple of days, I'll be making my way up to Accelerated to drop Russ's beautiful Supra off, and for us to put this Haltech in place, put a base map on it, and hopefully regain functionality on all 6 of the cylinders. We've been over the Mark IV and the SC300. There's still a bunch of stuff on the table here, so that only leaves the Mark II to talk about, and that is what the rest of the items on the table are for. So most of what's on this side of the table, plus a few items on the other side, are all fabrication components. And we also have a big box of electronics. So let's talk about the fabrication stuff first and work our way over to the electronics. Now you can see I have 2 neat stacks of aluminum tubing. I have an aluminum U-bend right here, as well as an assortment of different couplers, different T-bolt clamps. And then over on the side over here, we have a few items from Tycon. So all of the aluminum will be the new intercooler tubing for the Mark II. So we have the new intercooler made, but the intercooler doesn't do us much good if it is not connected to the turbo and the engine. So between the couplers and all of this tubing, I can make that a closed system. And I also have some bungs in a bag in the car for the IAT sensor, for the fuel pressure sensor, or I guess that would be on the regulator, but for the map sensor and things along those lines. So all this stuff will allow me to finish up the induction system, I guess would be kind of the flowery way to put it. And we'll get into that in probably the next episode, as this aluminum stuff should go pretty quickly. Now on the titanium front, I have two of these tight radius 2 3/4 inch 90-degree bends, as well as a 2-foot section of 2 3/4 inch straight tubing and a K&N air filter over there. Now these items will end up being the Mark II's new intake tube, and although titanium is not a necessity for the intake tube on the car, I thought it would be a nice touch, and B, trying to find tight radius aluminum bends ends up being kind of difficult, especially in an odd size like 2 3/4 inch. That's what the inlet on the CT26 Turbo that is on the Mark II, that's the same size as it. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, this seemed like the best option to make that work. So the filter, I haven't even popped it out of the box yet, but it should be a fairly simple cone filter, if I remember what I ordered correctly. And this stuff's been kind of sitting in the background for a little while now. But if I can win the fight against the box right here, there we go. We have this for our air filter. Not anything crazy large, as frankly I don't need it with the limited horsepower that this car is going to produce, but I certainly want to have some sort of a filter so I'm not sucking in kind of dirt and debris and all kinds of crap in the air. This will allow us to have nice clean air entering the engine, and the K&N filter brand, or the K&N brand itself and that company, is highly regarded in the realm of air filters, and they have been around for a long time producing stellar products. In terms of couplers, we have these nice thick wall, I think they're 4-ply, I would guess. I'd have to count it, but nice brand new black couplers for it. And we also have some nice T-bolt clamps as well, as if you're going to use silicone couplers, using regular worm clamps, not the way to go. T-bolt clamps are. So a T-bolt clamp, it functions similarly to a V-band minus the two like capturing shoulders that a V-band clamp has. These have a bolt, they have a nut, a nylock nut rather, and then we have the clamp body itself. And the way that it works is you tighten this nut down, it pulls this side of the clamp over here in tighter like so, therefore reducing the inside diameter of the clamp and squeezing down on that silicone coupler and the piece of tubing inside of it and creating a seal that way. So that's why you see bead rolls on pieces of intercooler tubing if they're going to use T-bolt clamps like this. So that way the edge of the clamp has something to grab against, and you're much less likely to have the coupling come apart and you try to pressurize the atmosphere with your turbo. It doesn't usually work that well that way. And the last kind of non-electronic item for the Mark II, not nearly as exciting as all the fabrication components, but we have a pair of brand new tie rod ends for it. So now I can actually hook up the steering system and not have the wheels kind of want to go lazy eye on me or spread out or do anything crazy. So these will be really easy, just thread them on, tighten everything down, and then it will be the job of more than likely my buddy Darius when it's alignment time to get everything kind of in spec squared away that way and get the car to the point where it will drive down the road straight. And lastly, but arguably the most important of all the parts for the Mark II on the table here is in this white box here. Now you can see kind of the branding on these boxes here, which will probably give it away. But if I move these smaller boxes out of the way, and if I open the larger box, I gave him dealer's choice for the ECU for the Mark II, and we ended up with a Holley HP. So this will be my first experience with a Holley ECU of any sort. I have never had a car that I complex with putting what I think of as a domestic ECU on an import. But that's on me. That's my own kind of setback in my own mind. And I decided to kind of open my mind, broaden my horizons a little bit, and make Bob happy. And now I'm the proud owner of this Holley HP ECU. So this should do everything that we need it to do on the Mark II. As that car, we're not shooting for a ton of power. We don't need a crazy amount of features like a Terminator or something along those lines. The HP, believe it has all the features that we need to make that car run and make it function correctly. A nice, modern, consolidated package. And in this box as well as these boxes, I have a universal unterminated wiring harness to make Russ's life easier when it comes time to wire this. We have all of these sensors that are necessary here. There's a wideband O2 sensor in the box here. Looks like right here we have the communication cable, and then the fasteners to hold the ECU in place wherever I decide to mount it. The sticker, of course, very important. And this will make Bob's life much easier to get this car up and running. Again, having a nice modern ECU will make all of the functionality that the car needs possible. And frankly, I'm really excited to get this ECU in the car, get the car up and running, get it squared away, and be back to enjoying that thing, cruising around and using it as kind of a Sunday cruiser, Sunday driver type thing. So there we go. All kinds of new parts, new goodies, and new things to look forward to with all of the different projects around here. I can't wait to get going on all of these different pieces and parts and everything else. But for right now, let's go ahead, get back to current times and talk more about the SC300 and what's to come with that project. So as you can see, there is a bunch of projects upcoming, a bunch of things in motion. We have the intercooler tubing and the intake tube coming up for the Mark II very soon. The SC is now the proud owner of a Haltech Elite 2500, and the Mark IV will soon be able to bump into the beams under power with that smooth stage bump box. So the biggest thing that I want to go over in this episode for the remainder of it is the SC. Since this car doesn't get a whole lot of love on the channel, I figured it's about time to change that, and this will be one of the upcoming projects and big things that we'll be working on, I guess, in addition to working on the Mark II. So this car, if you guys are not familiar with it, this was actually my first car. I've had this thing for, oh God, I'm going to date myself at this point in time, but for 16 years, I would say. So it's been around for a while, and similarly to the Mark IV, this has been through a number of different turbo setups over the years. Initially, it was an excess power 70mm kit. From there, I put a Borg Warner, or it might have been a Bullseye Power, one of the two. It was the world's worst T6 turbo setup. An old S475 with the excess power T4 manifold cut apart, modified to be a T6 manifold. Horrible downpipe, horrible intercooler setup, so on and so forth. Not a good setup, but at the time I thought I was the next best thing with my first big turbo setup. And to be fair, the car did make, I think, 620 wheel on 93 pump gas with a pretty sketchy tune. That setup went away when it came time to do big turbo stuff with the Mark IV. Then this thing went down to a 6262 setup that was a lot of fun. And now we have this setup that is on the car now. So at this point in time, and right as I'm saying this, this is an on-3 67mm turbo. It's a billet wheel ball bearing deal. It's on a pretty wild 304 stainless tube header that I built for it. Inconel downpipe out of some extra materials I had sitting around. The engine is a built 3-liter. It's a steel rod. I can't remember what rods I put in it actually, but it's Wiseco pistons. Should be around 9 to 10 to 1, something along those lines as far as the compression is concerned. Fueling, I have ID 1700X injectors in it. I have this very quickly put together intake manifold that I built for it a few years ago. And it is a factory 5-speed car. So it's a W58 5-speed transmission. Not the strongest thing in the world, but gets the job done for the time being. And the most important thing right now at this point in time is the new ECU. So this car before was always on old AEM boxes. And in trying to get this thing up and running, we went through, I think it was 3 AEM boxes, 2 V1s and 1 V2. And all of them would cause at least 1 dead cylinder, if not 2, worst case. So it came time where I realized that having an ECU that was nearly of legal drinking age in the US was probably not the most advantageous thing. So that is where this comes into play. So, like you saw in the new parts section of this video, the car is now powered by this Haltech Elite 2500. And it has just a bass tune on it right now. But having a modern ECU with modern features and computer boards and everything else in it, this will be a much more effective tuning solution moving forward, and the car will be much happier, I'll be much happier, and everything will work out better that way. So this car, unfortunately, has always kind of taken the back burner to the Mark IV. It's always been kind of the redheaded stepchild, but I really do love this car, and I really want it to be something cool and special and something better than what it is right now. So you can see everything is kind of dirty and grimy and crusty, and there are a number of projects that need to be done on this car. One of the first ones is it needs a new header. Now, this is partially because I like building headers, but the more important reason is because of this clearance right here. And if I zoom in, maybe you guys can see that the header does not allow enough clearance for the alternator plug to actually plug into its home. So I could switch this over to a 1-wire alternator, like a self-exciting alternator, and that would solve the problem, be able to keep this header, but that really is kind of a half measure in my mind, as yeah, you could swap the alternator, but that still doesn't change the fact that there is a clearance issue between the header and the alternator. So I'll build a new header for it, and I'll make sure that I keep the turbo in the same location, so that way the Inconel downpipe can still be used. It'll just be everything from the cylinder head up to the turbine inlet that will be changed. As you can see as well, we have no intercooler tubing. So I built this intercooler as probably one of the last videos that this car was featured in, or that this was centralized around on the channel. So I need to build intercooler tubing for it. And I really want to either build or get a new intake manifold as well. I'm really not happy with that one. It was just a quick, I need a manifold effort in solution, but I can do better than what's on there now, something a little bit prettier. And if I want this car to be nice, that is a big focal point and something that needs to be addressed. The fuel system also needs to be addressed. The whole thing from at least the pumps up to the rail, pretty much the injectors are the only good thing, or the only endearing quality of the fuel system. So we'll go through, put a new, modern, better fuel system on it that's a little bit, or a lot of bit, more capable than what is on there currently. And that will be good. We won't have any fuel system worries, and the car will not be fuel limited for the power that it can make. Exhaust-wise, right now the car is on an open downpipe, as I'm sure you guys were able to hear when I pulled up at the beginning of the episode. It's loud, it sounds wild, but my days of wanting to drive open downpipe and loud cars around all the time are far in the rearview mirror. So we'll need to build a new exhaust for it. I have some ideas of how I would like to do this, but we will cross that bridge a little bit later, as I'll need to save some money up to do what I want to do with it. And there are other more pressing matters that need to be attended to, namely the header, before I can build any of the exhaust. But I'm glad to have the car back, and obviously it needs paint and body as well, the same as pretty much these 3 projects right here. But that will be addressed much farther down the line, as I want to get the car mechanically sound, able to be driven around and all of that. So that's where I'll focus my efforts on initially. I'd also like to build a new radiator for it. As you guys know, I have a large desire to build everything myself on these cars. Radiator on this thing, it's old, it's beat up, and it really just needs a new one. So rather than buying one, or buying a completed one, I'll buy a core, build my own, and I will be well that way as well. So with all of that being said, I think that will be about the end of this episode. So thank you guys as always for coming along on all these different journeys with me, all of these different adventures, and I look forward to what we have upcoming, as there is no shortage of projects, no shortage of work, and there will be a lot of cool things in the near future. So between the SC, the Mark IV, the Mark II, all of the Turbo Toyota stuff, and even some other projects that will be coming in as well, there's a lot to look forward to in the near future. I'll also be soliciting for questions for the second Q&A that I'll be doing. That'll be in the next week or 2, so keep an eye out for that. That will be your opportunity to submit any questions that you have for me, welding and fabrication related, race car related. Hell, you can even ask life related questions if you want to. I'm happy to answer all of them, and I look forward to answering them and to reading them and all of that. So before I drone on anymore, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, and I will see you all in the next episode.